Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be exploring something that is fundamental to bonsai care, and that is soil. If you're just getting started with bonsai, I think a lot of people maybe just assume, oh, I can just grab some, potting soil, but no.
It's not going to work. Using regular potting soil for bonsai can actually cause more harm than good in the long run.
Okay, so can you elaborate on that? Why is regular potting soil not suitable for bonsai?
Sure. One of the biggest issues with regular potting soil, especially those that have a lot of organic matter, like peat moss,
Yeah.
is their tendency to compact. And this becomes a really big problem when you're dealing with the limited space of a bonsai pot.
Right, I see. So why is compaction such a big deal, specifically for bonsai?
Well, compaction basically chokes off the airflow to the roots.
Hmm.
And bonsai, like all trees, need that well-aerated soil for their roots to be able to breathe and, absorb nutrients properly.
Hmm.
So when the soil gets compacted, it's almost as if you're suffocating the roots.
Oh, wow.
And that leads to, a whole bunch of other problems down the line.
So it's not just about the roots not getting enough air. It sounds like this also affects their ability to take in the necessary nutrients.
Exactly, yeah. And on top of that, regular potting soil is designed to retain moisture, which is great for, plants that are in the ground or maybe even in larger containers.
Yeah.
But for bonsai, this can actually lead to overwatering.
Oh, okay, I see. So how does regular potting soil contribute to overwatering in bonsai?
Well, the fine particles in regular potting soil tend to hold on to water for a really long time,
Yeah.
creating, a really soggy environment that can be very harmful to bonsai roots. And overwatering can then lead to root rot, which is a really common problem for bonsai, especially if they're planted in the wrong kind of soil.
So I've got compaction leading to root suffocation, and then we have the increased risk of overwatering.
Yeah, it's not that regular potting soil is bad in itself.
Okay.
It's just not designed for the very specific needs of bonsai.
Right, they need that carefully controlled environment.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about all the disadvantages of regular potting soil for bonsai. Now let's move on to what makes bonsai soil so special.
Well, there are 5 main things that really set bonsai soil apart: drainage, water retention, aeration, nutrient holding capacity, and pH levels. Let's start with drainage. Bonsai soil is specifically designed to allow that excess water to drain away really rapidly, preventing the roots from becoming waterlogged. Now, you might be thinking, well, won't that make the soil dry out too quickly? And that's where the next important element comes in water retention.
Okay, so we need the water to drain away quickly, but also hold some moisture to keep those roots hydrated. That seems like a delicate balance.
It is. It's a delicate balance, but a good bonsai soil blend. It achieves that balance by using components that have varying water holding capacities. You can think of it like a sponge that allows the extra water to pass through, but still holding enough to keep things moist.
What about aeration? Why is it so important for those roots to be able to breathe?
Well, just like us, roots need oxygen to survive. If the soil is too compacted, it's like trying to breathe in a crowded room. So bonsai soil, it's designed to be light and airy with plenty of space for oxygen to reach those roots.
Those air pockets are really important for the roots to function properly. Now, bonsai trees, they're small, but I imagine they still need nutrients to grow, right?
Oh, absolutely. They do. Bonsai soil contains components that have this amazing ability to hold on to those essential nutrients and release them slowly over time. It's all about providing a consistent and balanced supply of nutrients without overwhelming that delicate root system. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most technical characteristic, pH levels. The pH is basically a measure of how acidic or alkaline a substance is, and it's measured on a scale of 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral.
Anything below 7 is acidic, like lemon juice, and anything above 7 is alkaline, like baking soda. Why is pH so important for a bonsai's well-being?
It all comes down to nutrient availability. You see, pH directly influences the ability of roots to absorb those essential nutrients from the soil. If the pH is too high or too low, certain nutrients become chemically, locked. And even if they're present in the soil, the bonsai just can't access them.
So it's not just about having the right nutrients in the soil, it's about making sure they're in a form the bonsai can actually use.
Exactly.
So knowing your bonsai species and their ideal pH range is crucial, right? I imagine some are a bit more particular than others.
You're absolutely right. While most bonsai prefer slightly acidic soil, usually in the range of 5.5 to 6.5, there are definitely variations between species. For example, deciduous trees like elms tend to be more tolerant of a wider pH range.
But conifers, I've heard they're a bit more sensitive.
That's a good observation. Conifers like junipers and pines generally prefer a more acidic environment.
How can we tell if our bonsai soil's pH is out of whack?
One sign is chlorosis,
Okay.
a yellowing of the leaves.
Mm.
It often indicates the bonsai isn't getting the nutrients it needs
Okay.
due to imbalanced pH. Simple pH testing kits are available at most garden centers.
Okay.
To lower pH, making it more acidic, you can add sulfur or aluminum sulfate. To raise it, making it more alkaline, add lime or wood ash.
We've been talking about how bonsai soil is so different from just your regular potting soil, all thanks to those 5 key characteristics: drainage, water retention, aeration, nutrient holding, and pH levels. So how do we achieve that with bonsai soil?
Well, we achieve that through the components of the soil.
Okay.
And there's 2 main categories we're going to talk about today:
Okay.
inorganic and organic.
Okay, so what is the difference between those two?
So inorganic components are really the backbone of the soil mix. They don't break down easily.
Okay.
They provide structure, and they really facilitate that drainage. The organic components add life to the soil.
Okay.
They hold moisture. They provide nutrients as they decompose.
Okay.
And they contribute to that healthy soil structure.
So it's kind of a balancing act between those two.
Absolutely. It is a delicate dance.
Yeah. Okay. Let's start with the inorganic side of things. Akadama, that's kind of like the classic bonsai soil, right?
Yeah, it's a type of granular clay that's been mined and fired in Japan for centuries, specifically for use in horticulture. Well, what's fascinating about akadama is its structure. It's able to hold a good amount of moisture, which is important for keeping those roots hydrated, but it also has excellent drainage, which prevents that root rot we were talking about.
So it's striking that perfect balance, keeping the roots moist but not soggy.
Absolutely.
But I've heard that akadama can break down over time,
That's true. Yeah.
which can be a bit of a hassle.
Yeah, it does tend to break down, especially with frequent watering, and that can lead to compaction, reduced drainage.
And then you got to repot more often.
Exactly. So regular repotting is essential when you're using akadama. There are also some exciting alternatives emerging, like zeolite, for example.
Well,
It's a mineral with similar water retention and nutrient holding capabilities.
as akadama.
As akadama, yes.
Okay.
And it's known for its longevity, so you might not need to repot as frequently.
Ooh, that's appealing.
And then there's horticultural molar.
Molar, okay.
It's a type of diatomaceous earth, also known for its excellent drainage and water retention.
All right, so that's akadama. Now let's move on to pumice.
Okay, pumice, a volcanic rock. It's very porous and lightweight,
Okay.
which makes it a champion of drainage and aeration. All those tiny air pockets allow the roots to breathe and the excess water to escape.
Preventing things like root rot.
Exactly.
Is there anything comparable to pumice in terms of those like airy properties?
Yeah, perlite's a good alternative. It's a lightweight expanded glass material that offers similar drainage and aeration benefits.
So it's kind of mimicking that porous nature.
Exactly, and it's readily available, often used in various horticultural applications.
Okay, great. So perlite's a good option if you can't find pumice or just want to experiment. So we've got akadama, pumice. Now let's talk about lava rock.
Lava rock.
Another volcanic rock.
It is, yes.
But how does it differ from pumice?
Well, they both offer excellent drainage,
Okay.
but lava rock retains a bit less water.
Okay.
So it's a good choice for bonsai species that prefer drier conditions.
What about those crushed aggregate products?
Yeah.
They mentioned as alternatives to lava rock.
Yeah, things like crushed granite, flint grit, even decomposed granite can provide similar drainage properties.
Okay, so again, it's about finding what's available, what works best for you.
Exactly, and they can be more budget-friendly options, especially if you have access to those materials locally.
Right, because sourcing all those like specialized bonsai components can be a pain.
Yeah, for sure.
So if you can find something local that works,
Exactly.
that's even better.
It's all about being resourceful.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So we've got some good alternatives for lava rock. Now, last but not least on our inorganic list, we have grit.
Grit, yes.
What's its role?
Grit is all about drainage,
Okay.
enhancing drainage, much like lava rock.
Okay.
And it's particularly useful for species or bonsai styles that require exceptionally well-drained soil.
Okay, so we were talking about how different bonsai species might have different soil preferences.
Yeah.
Are there specific bonsai soils that kind of cater
Yeah.
to those needs?
There are some specialized soils that we can use.
Okay.
For example, kanuma.
Okay.
Kanuma is another type of volcanic soil from Japan,
Okay.
and it's often favored for acid-loving trees.
Okay.
So things like azaleas and rhododendrons.
Gotcha. So
It has a lower pH compared to akadama,
okay.
so it helps to create that acidic environment that those trees love.
Okay. What about Kiryu?
Kiryu.
I've also heard that one.
Yeah, Kiryu is known for its high mineral content.
Okay.
So it can be beneficial for certain tree species,
Okay.
especially those that need a little extra boost.
Gotcha. So it's like a mineral supplement.
Yeah, you could say that.
Okay.
It's like a little extra boost for your bonsai.
All right, great. So that covers the inorganic components.
Yes.
So let's delve into the world of organic components.
Okay. Well, one of the most common and effective is composted pine bark.
Okay.
It's a great source of nutrients.
Okay.
Improves soil structure, helps retain moisture.
But doesn't get waterlogged.
Exactly. It avoids becoming waterlogged, and it also has a slightly acidic pH, which many bonsai species prefer, yes.
So it's a win-win.
It is, yeah.
But I heard that, like akadama, it breaks down over time.
That's true, yeah.
You got to replenish it.
As it decomposes, you need to replenish it periodically, usually during repotting.
Okay.
But that decomposition process also releases nutrients into the soil, so it's beneficial for your bonsai. If you can't find composted pine bark,
Yeah.
you could use composted bark fines or even shredded bark mulch.
Right.
Just make sure to compost them thoroughly before adding them to your soil mix.
Okay, so no fresh bark mulch.
Right, it needs to be composted.
What about peat moss?
For peat moss, you could try cocoa coir.
Cocoa coir, what's that?
It's a byproduct of coconut processing.
Okay.
It's readily available, offers good water retention, and it's considered a more sustainable option than peat moss.
Okay, so that's a good one to keep in mind.
It is, yeah.
So even if we can't get our hands on the official bonsai soil ingredients, we can still create a healthy environment for our trees.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, I've heard that sphagnum moss, which is known for holding a lot of water,
Right.
should be used sparingly in bonsai soil.
Yeah, that's right.
Why is that?
Well, sphagnum moss is like a super sponge. It's incredibly useful for specific applications, like increasing humidity or aiding root development.
Okay.
But too much of it in a bonsai pot can create a waterlogged environment, which can lead to root problems.
Right.
So it's a valuable tool, but it needs to be used with caution.
Okay, so it's like too much of a good thing.
Exactly. Moderation is key.
All right, so we've explored a whole bunch of ingredients, both inorganic and organic.
We have.
But I imagine the real art is in combining them in the right ratios, right?
Precisely. There's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Yeah.
The ideal bonsai soil mix needs to be tailored to the specific needs of your tree.
Okay.
You have to take into account factors like species, climate, even your personal preferences.
Right, because different trees have different needs.
Exactly. And different environments will affect how the soil behaves.
Let's actually talk about that. Like, how do we mix the soil
Okay.
for different types of bonsai trees?
So when it comes to mixing bonsai soil, I like to think in terms of ratios. For deciduous trees, the classic ratio is 50% akadama, 25% pumice, and 25% lava rock.
50, 25, 25, got it. What about organic stuff like pine bark?
You can add a little, but don't go overboard. Organic matter decomposes, and too much can actually make the soil too dense.
So maybe just a little bit for extra water retention?
If you're in a dry climate, yeah, maybe like 5% of the mix.
Okay. Is the mix different for conifers?
A little different, yeah. Conifers generally need even better drainage than deciduous trees. The classic recipe for conifers is equal parts akadama, pumice, and lava rock.
33, 33, 33.
That's the one.
And what about organic matter for conifers?
Same as before, just a little bit if you're in a dry climate, but usually they're happy with a well-drained inorganic mix.
Okay, I'm starting to get the hang of this. What about flowering and fruiting bonsai?
Those are a little different. They tend to need more water and nutrients to grow and produce those flowers and fruits.
So how do we change the soil mix for them?
You'll want to up the percentage of akadama to around 60%, and then reduce the pumice and lava rock to 20% each.
60, 20, 20. What about organic stuff for flowering and fruiting trees?
You can add a bit more pine bark, but no more than 10%.
Right, we still want good drainage. Now, I'm curious about tropical and succulent bonsai. Those seem like they would have totally different needs.
You're right. They come from very different environments, so we need to adjust their soil mixes accordingly.
Let's start with tropical bonsai.
Tropical bonsai love warm, humid environments. So their mixes are often similar to deciduous trees, maybe with a little extra akadama if you live in a drier climate.
Should we add any pine bark for tropical bonsai?
You can add a little, maybe 5 to 10% of the total mix. Cocoa coir is another good option for retaining moisture.
Okay, what about succulent bonsai?
Succulent bonsai, though, they're the real outliers. Those guys need exceptional drainage.
So less akadama and more of the porous stuff.
Exactly. For succulents, we lean heavily on the pumice and lava rock. Sometimes we even swap out akadama altogether and use something like crushed granite to ensure those roots stay nice and dry.
I'm curious about particle size. Does that matter for bonsai soil?
Oh, absolutely. It can make a big difference. The size of the particles in your soil mix plays a crucial role in drainage and aeration.
Oh, I guess it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Bigger particles, bigger air spaces.
Exactly. Larger particles create larger air spaces within the soil, which allows for faster water drainage and better oxygen flow to the root. Smaller particles make a denser soil, which can be good for young trees or trees in small pots, because they need more moisture and support.
So smaller particles for younger trees. What about when they get bigger?
When your bonsai gets older and moves into a larger pot, you can use larger particles. It helps with drainage and lets the roots spread out.
So it's not just about the type of ingredients, it's also about their physical structure. So are we talking about like sifting our soil components to get the right particle sizes?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Investing in a set of bonsai soil sieves
Okay.
can make a world of difference.
Are there any guidelines for particle size?
There are. For young trees or small pots, you want particles around 2 to 4 millimeters, and then as the tree gets bigger, you can go up to 4 to 6 millimeters or even larger. For species that prefer drier conditions, like many conifers, you might want to opt for a higher percentage of coarse particles.
Okay, so it's all about knowing your tree and its preferences.
Exactly.
You mentioned climate earlier. How does that play into the soil mix?
Well, your local climate can really affect how your bonsai soil performs. For example, if you live in a humid area, you might want to increase the drainage capacity. You could add a little more pumice or lava rock, maybe 10% more. In a dry climate, you might need to increase the water retention, so you could add a bit more akadama or a touch more pine bark.
Got it. So we're adjusting the basic ratios based on the climate. What about the age of the tree?
A young bonsai, especially one in a training pot, needs a soil mix that encourages rapid root development. And to support that vigorous growth, we often use a slightly higher proportion of akadama in the mix for young trees.
So as the bonsai matures and graduates to a bigger pot, you can adjust the soil mix to focus more on stability and refinement, rather than that initial burst of growth.
Exactly. For mature trees, you can increase the drainage a bit, maybe decrease the akadama and add more pumice or lava rock.
And then what about the pot itself?
The pot is important too.
Yeah.
Smaller pots tend to dry out faster, so you might need a more water retentive mix. And the material of the pot can also affect drying time.
Okay.
So for example, unglazed pots will dry out faster than glazed pots.
So we've covered particle size, climate, and the age of the tree. Are there any other special needs we should know about?
There are a few. Some bonsai species have specific pH preferences. Azaleas and rhododendrons, for example, like acidic soil.
Interesting. How do we adjust the pH?
You can use a soil amendment, like elemental sulfur, to lower the pH, but always research your specific bonsai species first to see what pH range they prefer.
Okay, that's good to know. It's amazing how much goes into caring for these trees.
It is, but that's part of the fun. You get to create the perfect environment for your bonsai.
This has been really helpful. I'm feeling much more confident about mixing my own soil now. Before we move on, do you have any tips for beginners?
Sure. I always recommend starting with a simple mix, like the 50-25-25 ratio for deciduous trees, or the 33-33-33 ratio for conifers.
Keep it simple.
Exactly.
How to tell if we've chosen the right mix?
Yeah, one of the best ways is to just observe your bonsai and see how quickly the soil dries out.
Okay.
If it's drying out too quickly, you might need a more water retentive mix.
Okay.
If it's staying wet for too long, you might need a faster draining mix. Once you're comfortable with the basics, you can start experimenting.
Experimentation and observation.
Those are the keys to success with bonsai.
It's fascinating how much attention to detail goes into creating the perfect bonsai soil. It's a whole world unto itself.
It certainly is. And just when you think you've got a handle on all the ingredients and ratios, there's another layer of complexity to consider: the role of microorganisms in the soil.
So tell me more about these microorganisms and their roles.
Well, we have bacteria, which act as decomposers, breaking down organic matter into nutrients that the bonsai can use. Think of them as the city's recycling crew.
Yeah?
Then there are fungi, which are like the city's network,
Right.
spreading through the soil and connecting different parts of the ecosystem.
Interesting. And what about the mycorrhiza fungi? They seem to be kind of the stars of the show.
Yeah, they form a remultiple symbiotic relationship with bonsai roots,
Okay.
extending their reach for water and nutrients in exchange for sugars from photosynthesis.
So it's a mutually beneficial partnership.
Yes. This symbiosis is especially vital in the limited space of a bonsai pot where the root system is confined.
Right.
It's like having a team of microscopic helpers ensuring your bonsai gets all the nourishment it needs.
What can we do to make sure these beneficial microorganisms are happy and healthy in our bonsai pots?
That's a great question, and it brings us to another important aspect of bonsai care. Making sure the soil environment is just right for these microorganisms to thrive. Just like any living organism, these beneficial bacteria and fungi need the right balance of moisture, air, and nutrients to flourish. So it's not just about choosing the right ingredients for our bonsai soil, it's also about how we care for that soil over time.
What are some practical tips for maintaining that delicate balance in our bonsai soil?
One way is by using organic fertilizers, which provide a diverse range of nutrients for these microorganisms.
So we're feeding the soil, not just the tree.
Precisely. Chemical fertilizers, on the other hand, often bypass this natural process and can even harm the delicate balance of the soil ecosystem.
What about inoculants?
Inoculants are products that contain beneficial fungi and bacteria
Okay.
that you can add directly to your bonsai soil.
So it's like giving the soil a microbial boost.
Exactly. They help to introduce a diverse array of beneficial organisms, further supporting the health and vitality of your bonsai's root system.
So organic fertilizers and inoculants are two key ways to cultivate a thriving microbial community.
Yeah.
Are there any other tips for keeping those microscopic helpers happy?
One of the most important things is to avoid overwatering. Too much water can actually suffocate those beneficial microorganisms and create conditions that lead to root rot. We need to remember those key principles of drainage and moisture retention that we talked about earlier. When you water your bonsai, aim for a slow, deep soak that fully penetrates the soil.
Right.
Avoid quick splashes that only wet the surface. This deep soaking not only hydrates the entire root system,
Okay.
but it also helps flush out any accumulative salts or toxins, keeping the soil environment healthy. And always allow excess water to drain freely from the pot.
No soggy bottoms.
Exactly.
But how do we know for sure when the soil is dry enough to water?
Well, you can use your finger to feel the moisture level a couple inches below the surface.
Okay.
Or you can invest in a moisture meter for more precise readings.
Okay, so there are tools for that.
There are. Another technique is to lift the pot.
Lift the pot.
Yeah, if it feels light, it's likely time to water.
Oh, okay, that's a good tip.
Easy way to gauge the moisture level.
Now, what about the type of water we use? Does that matter?
It does. Ideally, you want to use rainwater or filtered water,
Okay.
free of chlorine and other harsh chemicals.
Okay, so our tap water might not be the best choice.
If you're using tap water,
Okay.
let it sit out for 24 hours before watering.
Okay.
This allows the chlorine, which can harm beneficial microorganisms, to evaporate. And speaking of things that can harm the microbial community,
Yeah.
let's talk about pesticides.
I know pesticides can be helpful for managing pests,
Right.
but can they affect the soil ecosystem?
While pesticides can target harmful pests,
Right.
they can also unintentionally harm the beneficial microorganisms in the soil. It's like using a weapon that harms both enemies and allies.
So it's crucial to choose pesticides wisely,
Yes.
opting for those that target specific pests rather than broad-spectrum options.
Precisely, a healthy soil ecosystem is naturally more resilient to pests and diseases.
Right.
The diverse microbial community works as a defense system, helping to keep those threats in check.
I want to actually talk about mixing the soil itself now.
Sounds good.
I'm curious about those bonsai sieves. It seems like they're more than just like a tool to remove dust.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, sifting is really the first step in preparing bonsai soil.
Okay.
And it has a dual purpose, right? So you want to remove those fine particles that can actually block drainage and aeration.
Right.
But you also want to select the right particle size so that you get the right soil structure.
That makes sense. So we sift first, then what?
Then you combine your ingredients using the ratios we talked about earlier.
Right, like the 50-25-25 for deciduous trees and the 33-33-33 for conifers. But how do I actually measure that out?
You can use measuring cups or scoops.
Okay, simple enough. So we've measured it all out.
Mm-hmm.
We're ready to combine.
Mm-hmm.
Do we just fill the pot then?
Well, not so fast.
Oh,
The way you prep the pot is just as important as the soil itself.
okay.
And this is where layering comes in.
Layering.
Yeah. Layering your soil can further enhance drainage and create a more consistent environment for the roots.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, a common technique is to create a drainage layer at the bottom of the pot using coarse lava rock or pumice.
Oh, okay, so that's like the first layer.
Exactly. That ensures that excess water can escape quickly, preventing waterlogging.
And then on top of that goes our soil mix.
Right, and then you can add a final top dressing.
Top dressing, what's that?
Top dressing serves multiple purposes. It can help prevent soil erosion, retain moisture, and it also enhances the visual appeal of your bonsai.
So it's functional and fashionable.
Exactly.
What kind of materials can we use for top dressing?
You can use fine gravel, crushed rock, or even moss. Choose a material that complements the style and color of your bonsai and pot.
So it's like the finishing touch.
It is, yeah.
All right, so we've got our perfectly layered and top-dressed soil. I wanted to address a common question I hear.
Right.
What about those pre-mixed bonsai soils?
Oh, okay. Yeah, the ones you see at garden centers.
Yeah. Are those a good option?
They can be, especially for beginners.
Okay.
But it's important to choose a high-quality blend,
Okay.
one that's specifically formulated for bonsai.
What should we look for when choosing one?
Well, look for a blend that contains a good balance of inorganic and organic components.
Oh,
Similar to what we've discussed today.
right.
Avoid mixes that contain a high percentage of peat moss
Okay.
or other materials that can become compacted and restrict drainage.
Wow. I have to say, this has been a really eye-opening deep dive. So for anyone listening who wants to kind of get started with creating their own bonsai soil,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways?
Well, I think the most important thing is to remember that drainage is key. You want that soil to drain well.
Okay.
Choose the right mix for your tree and your climate.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to experiment.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into bonsai soil.